Good day, everybody. This is Matt Reetz, the Executive Director of Madison Audubon. Thanks for joining me on this recorded webinar. I apologize that I wasn't able to do it on Facebook Live. I had the slowest internet connection I've had in a long time, probably all those people getting online to watch Tiger King on Netflix. So happy to record this. This is a presentation that's meant to be light and fun, and there's some bird science in here, but a lot of non-science too. If you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to me by email, or you can give the office a call, or you can engage with us on Facebook. So I'm going to share my screen. You'll hear me hear some clicks from my mouse, but mostly I think you'll just be able to watch the presentation. Bear with me while I get this screen shared. There we go. So, title of this talk is A Little Birdie Told Me, Origin, Myth, and Science in Bird-Themed Language. And, you know, I was thinking about phrases like bird-brained and as the crow flies and eat like a bird and lay an egg and all these bird-themed phrases that I hear commonly in the English language. And I wondered sort of where do they come from, and how do they reflect and describe the real lives of birds? So this really stemmed from just some curiosity and just doing a little bit of investigating by some books that I had and then the internet to see a deeper dive on what these phrases mean and how they relate to science. Very important to note, I always say this in every presentation I ever give: birds are awesome. This is sort of a universal truth. It cannot be argued. Birds are the greatest thing ever. They bring joy, they bring happiness. So I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. So there are probably more than 100 bird-related idioms and phrases. There are some that are really popularized. There are a number of them that we're going to talk about today. We won't be able to get to all of them. And our goals in this talk are just to explore some of these commonly used phrases. And then we'll look at a little bit of their origin, see if we can dive into some of their origin. There's some of these that are easy to figure out. Some of these are not, and there's some controversy around where they come from. And it's really important to note that I'm going to use the word etymology here and there, but that's the origin of a word and the historical development of its meaning. And let me just tell you that I am no etymologist at all. That is not my my background or my training. Most of what I discovered on this is taken from the interwebs, so you'll have to take that for what it's worth. And where needed on some of these bird phrases, we're going to dig into the science and how they relate to the actual science of birds. So, by the way, the phrase "a little birdie told me," which is the title of this talk, has also a contentious origin. Some attribute it to Ecclesiastes, where there's a quote that says, "Do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say." Others believe this refers to Richard Wagner's Siegfried, in which the main character comes to understand that the song of a small bird instructs him to steal a ring and a helmet. And there is even another old source in Norse legend of Sigurd, who slew the dragon Fafnir, probably mispronounced that, and got a bit of dragon's blood on its tongue when he was roasting its heart. This made it possible for Sigurd to understand what the birds were saying. So already a little contention there, but really interesting backgrounds on some of these things. So let's start with one that a lot of you probably know, which is give a hoot. And that is, of course, when someone cares a lot about something, we say that they give a hoot. And everybody knows that owls hoot, and they start hooting often when an intruder appears on their territory, or when they're courting a mate. These are two situations when they definitely care about a situation. But intriguingly, this expression probably isn't related to owl. So, you know, a good example of this is, I hope you give a hoot about this great work that Madison Audubon is doing, especially in these interesting times. The phrase is interesting because here's, you know, we all know that owls hoot. So here's an example of a bark with their "Who cooks for you sound. But this expression probably isn't related to owls. In 1877, people in New York, where the expression originated, more often said "give a hooter," as in this. Your opinion ain't worth a hooter, and this was probably a mispronunciation or a misunderstanding of the word iota, which is means a small bit. So it doesn't matter. Meant to say this is not worth an iota, which means it's not worth much, but then became it's not worth a hoot. So not related to birds, the etymology of this word. Although Woodsy the owl gives a hoot that you don't pollute. Second barred owl sound. One that we often use a lot is that something is for the birds. This has a interesting negative connotation. It means something that's worthless or undesirable. For example, I don't agree, Matt, that new movie is strictly for the birds. So the etymology of this is interesting. Before cars, the streets were completely full of horse-drawn wagons. And so this is how people principally got around other than just walking around. So if you wanted to go by any kind of vehicle, it's typically a horse-drawn carriage. So this is, late 1800s, for example. And a lot of folks talk about really what the streets were like at that time, because there were a number of horses. And if you've been around horses or grew up on a farm, you know that they produce a decent amount of waste. So the streets were basically filled with horse chips and horse manure, and there are undigested oats in them, and they basically served to nourish a large population of English sparrows that would come and sit and eat out of the manure pile. So if you say something's for the birds, you're politely saying it's horse manure. If you get a sense of what the streets look like, this is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but the streets were filled with horse manure, and those provided food for the birds. So if it's a negative thing to say that was for the birds. I like to think that things that are for the birds are very positive, however, of course. All right, so how about lay an egg? I notice a lot of these are negative, but so it means to be completely unsuccessful, to fail badly. So, for example, boy, I really laid an egg in this presentation to you. I definitely didn't in the Facebook Live presentation because I never got it online. So where does this come from? Well, from the British sport of cricket, a failure to score gets a 0, which looks like an egg, and they would often say that you lay an egg because you failed to score. Also taken from baseball, where a 0 is a goose egg. So it's not, it's really about that 0 in laying an egg. But what's interesting about this, and I think it deserves sort of fuller exploration, and let's talk very briefly about the science of bird reproduction and the marvels of egg laying. So first of all, laying an egg is a really interesting process, a very highly tuned, evolved process. So laying an egg, for example, will save weight for flight. That's one of the reasons why birds lay eggs, because they process their young outside of their bodies, unlike mammals, for example. There's seasonal atrophy of organs associated with reproduction. So a female, many female birds only have one ovary already to save weight, and those ovaries will actually atrophy during migration, in particular, or especially in fall migration, and they get lighter, so that the bird has less weight for the really expensive process of spring and fall migration. So this bobbling, for example, this is a male, but the male organs also atrophy and get smaller, and females as well, but their ovaries also get smaller. The kiwi egg is huge. This is a kiwi. It's a flightless bird that lives in New Zealand, and this is Apteryx australis, the common brown kiwi. There's, I think, 5 species of kiwis. It's a really amazing flightless bird. It has wings, but no ability to fly. It has amazing adaptations for finding food, really sensitive beak. It's a nocturnal, principally nocturnal, but it has a gigantic egg. The egg is 20% of the mother's mass and 65% yolk, and it has a 60 to 70-day incubation. So this is the largest egg by body size of any animal that exists. So here's an example. Take a look at the kiwi as I switch to what its skeleton looks like. That's how much the egg takes up in space inside this female kiwi before she lays the egg. So it's a gigantic thing. And because it's a flightless bird, she can get away with this. This would not be possible in any of the migrating birds that we have, because it's too large. Well, not migrating birds, but flighted birds. So a female cardinal that's flying around could not fly around with an egg this size. She has a much smaller egg. So she lays multiple eggs that are smaller, and they typically happen pretty quickly. Laying intervals for those kinds of birds are really fast. So this is a brown-headed cowbird female, one of my favorite birds. A lot of people really find their mode of reproduction detestable because they lay their eggs in the nests of other bird species and force them to raise their young. It's really a brilliant reproductive strategy, has evolved over eons. And brown-headed cowbirds are incredibly hardworking and smart. So they are egg factories. So they, like a lot of bird species, can crank out eggs pretty quickly. So this brown-headed cowbird can lay an egg a day, and often as many as multiple days in a row. So 10 to 20 plus days in a row, a female cowbird is laying an egg. And some wild birds like this brown-headed cowbird can lay 40 eggs in a season. So they are cranking out egg after egg after egg. It's really quite amazing. The marvels of egg laying also extend to the colors and the styles of egg. They come in a variety of colors and patterns. Some of these are adaptive, like the mottled colors you see on some eggs that make them difficult to see. Some of the egg colors are related to diet, but some of them can help them be seen in dark cavities. For example, a bluebird egg is blue, and some people speculate that that is so that they can be seen when they're nesting in these cavities, like a bluebird box, for example. Some can use the colors to recognize them as their own. Gray catbird eggs, for example, are blue, really nice blue color, mottled blue, and that may help recognize them versus, say, a brown-headed cowbird egg, which is a white and brown mottled egg. And some of this is also, again, used in camouflage. A great example of this is a killdeer nest. So where's the killdeer nest? This is a railroad track. They like to nest in scrapes on the ground. So a killdeer is great at hiding its nest and hiding its eggs. This is where it's located. I hope you can see my mouse. It's sort of in the center and to the right. There's 3 eggs sitting there, and they look a lot like that when they're up close. They're mottled, they're really hard to see, and there's just a scrape on the ground. And the female also will get up off the nest and run away as soon as somebody comes, and get away from the nest. She'll skirt really far away so that you don't know the location of where she was, and then she'll do a broken wing display to get and try to have you follow her away from the nest. So there's another great adaptation there too. So really interesting reproduction strategies and like fascinating biology when it comes to laying eggs. Eggs are also different shapes, which is fascinating. They're some of them are extremely round, almost like a ball, and some of them are piriform, which means that they have like a tapered end to them. And this can be related to the ease of passage to get them out of the female cloaca, or it could be in some cases related to nest packing. So how they fit in a nest, for example, the narrow end will sometimes go towards the center, so you can pack more eggs into a smaller space. If you're limited by a nest or a cavity, then that tapered end will allow more eggs to be packed in if they're pointed towards the center. They're also really good at not rolling in certain situations. So there's a lot of birds that nest in precarious situations, and they maybe don't nest necessarily within a nest. A lot of seabirds, for example, will nest directly on ledges. And if they had an egg that was closer to round and it got bumped or the wind blew, it would blow right off the ledge and into the water or crack below on the rocks. So they have these really long piriform eggs that basically what happens if you poke this thing and you pushed it, it would roll in a tight circle. So it's unlikely to roll off. So it's a really fascinating reproductive adaptation that has developed. So in egg laying. So bird reproduction, just this one little portion. We don't have enough time to really cover egg laying and this all that's involved in reproduction and in this aspect here. But it's incredible what egg laying is all about. It's really fascinating, and it's incredible. Laying an egg, a bird egg, is just a wonder of adaptation. It's a wonder of efficiency and also of incredible output. So I would argue that if you wanted to say that somebody had laid an egg, or a team had laid an egg, or somebody was given a presentation had laid an egg, then you'd be giving them a compliment. But that's just me. Okay, one of my favorites is Crazy as a Loon. Many of you know this. Chances are that you have heard this phrase before. It means insane or off your rocker or bonkers. So, chances are that many of you grew up knowing, Looney Tunes, for example, and I never really thought that it meant something about like serious madness, but so where does this one come from? We all know that well, maybe not all of us, but many of you are familiar with the calls that loons make, and they make kind of somewhat maniacal calls. Hopefully you can hear this. One of my favorite calls, of course, and many of you really associate this with the North Woods in Canada. Beautiful, fabulous bird. It's huge, by the way. If you ever see one up close, it's like a bird battleship. I can't get this to stop. It's just going to play in the background. So, but it's not really related to loons, this phrase. It's, at least since the time of the Romans, exposure to the light of the moon was, especially the full moon, was thought to cause mental derangement. Early science. So people who were a little bit unhinged by the moon's influence were called lunatics, which is from the Latin word luna for moon. So loony is simply a popular slang rendition of lunatic, which is basically meaning you're crazy because of the moon. So although we've got this unbelievable bird that makes an interesting cry that is remarkably like the laugh of someone exposed to too much moonlight, it is totally unrelated to lunatic. It takes its name from an Old Norse word that it means diver. So loons and lunatic and crazy as they're totally separated. So crazy as a loon does not refer to an actual loon. It refers to something completely different. So these two things are not associated with each other. So the word comes from the loon word for common loon comes from Old Norse word. So not related to each other. Birdbrain, that's probably one of my favorites. I have given talks, maybe you have seen them, on avian intelligence. Birds are thought to be, were for a long time thought to be not very bright. So if you called someone a bird brain, you were someone who is lacking in intelligence or careful thought. I don't know if you ever called someone a bird brain, but hopefully we can spin this on its head. So where does this come from? Where does calling someone a bird brain come from? I guess a couple different places. The dodo was not very helpful for this. It's not really quite fair. There are dodos. This is an extinct flightless bird that lived on the island of Mauritius. It had evolved without any kind of mammals at all, and had done just fine on the Isle of Mauritius, and was pretty strong populations, and had no exposure to a mammal, so it had no ability to understand what the dangers of a mammal were. And so when the Dutch sailors, which was at one point, the Dutch were the most powerful navy in the world, they were sailing all over the world. They stopped there, and they could walk right up to dodos and plunk them on the head, and or capture them and bring them on their ships. They were really easy food, and they got totally wiped out by the by sailors eating them as food, but also from introduction of feral of pigs and rats and other things that preyed on dodos and their nests. So, you know, a lot for many years, people thought that humans and their associated mammals were the highest form of evolution. Humans at the top, of course. So birds, being something that's completely different, could not have possibly evolved the same intelligence or been granted the same intelligence by a creator. So, and you know, you look at what some of the behaviors of chickens and turkeys and others, and they're not always the seemingly the most adaptive. So that's where sort of this bird brain term has come from. But bird brains are really interesting, and avian intelligence is, we're coming to understand more and more about avian intelligence and finding that birds are really smart. So bird brain is big. It is not big like a whale's brain is big. It is big like relative to their size. So they are much larger brains relative to their body size than to mammals. So they pack a lot into their head relative to what we do. So especially compared to reptiles or mammals. So that's a bird brain on the bottom and a reptile brain on the top of two animals that are relatively similar in size, not weight, but size. So the bottom is a macaw, the top is, I think, a lizard, a monitor lizard, perhaps. Not sure. But so bird brains are relatively big. Plus they are extremely dense. So they've got quantity and quality. They have about twice the density of cells as a mammal brain. So they're packing a lot into their brain space. And there are a lot of marvels of the bird brain that are associated with avian intelligence. And we don't want to get too much into how you measure intelligence, but there's a lot of different, just amazing things that have resulted from studying the avian brain. So, for example, birds have incredible memories, particularly birds that have to remember where items are. Crows have great memories for faces. Woodpeckers have great memories for locations. So any bird that has to do storage of food and then refine that food has what's called caching behavior, and they have to remember locations of all of the places where they've stuck acorns, for example, like an acorn woodpecker. So they have a really highly developed hippocampus region. It's incredible how like highly developed it is, because they can remember thousands of locations of individual items. I can't do that. I don't know where my keys are right now. So it's an incredible memory system. Birds are also really highly aware as well. So we have for many years thought like humans, for example, were the only self-aware organisms. And we've come to find out that dolphins can see themselves in mirrors and chimpanzees can do that. But also birds can as well. Magpies can exhibit self-recognition. This is a really cool study where these magpies put a little like sticker dot underneath the beak of a magpie, and they put it in a little room with a mirror, and they watched what happened. There's a little video of it. So here's Birdie, the magpie, and she's got a sticker right here. And she saw herself in the mirror, and she recognized herself in the mirror and recognized the location of the dot, and she is trying desperately to get it off. So she is self-aware. She recognizes that she is seeing a mirror image of herself and is trying to fix this dot that's on her plumage. That's smart. Birds are also really good at understanding they actually have a sense of time. There's some really interesting experiments with jays where they gave them food, and but more or less gave them the option to plan ahead. So if they knew they were not going to get food in the morning, they would actually think ahead and store food, and so that it was accessible for them. I can provide a link for this study if you're interested. But yeah, but super interesting that birds can think ahead and plan accordingly. Tool use is always thought to have been a sign of how smart humans are, for example. We were really excited when we learned about tool use in other in apes. We also know now that a lot of many more organisms use tools than we thought. And crows are probably the kings of the bird world and using tools to forage. We know that woodpeckers use tools. Herons use bait to fish. This is there's a bunch of different examples of this. This is a black-crowned night heron that at a park where they threw bread at this night heron. Please don't do that. Don't feed birds anything but good food. This is not a good food for birds. But this heron is making lemons of that lemonade out of that lemons, and using that bread to actually fish. So it's putting the bread in the water and having the bluegills.
Yeah, that one was wiggling.
Get it. So it's fishing.
Look at that, another big one. Look.
Look, you have to get it in the right
Apparently,
position.
according to this video, it had done this 9 times prior. So it's a successful method there. And crows are extremely good at tool use. I got to show you this as well. So this is a great TED Talk that you can look up online by Joshua Klein, who studies crows. But this is an experiment with not just tool use, but adaptation of tools.
And I'll give you an example of that. So this is Betty. She's a New Caledonian crow, and these crows use sticks in the wild to get insects and whatnot out of pieces of wood. Here she's trying to get a piece of meat out of a tube, but the researchers had a problem. They messed up and left just a stick of wire in there. And she hadn't had the opportunity to do this before. You see it wasn't working very well. So she adapted. Now this is completely unprompted. She had never seen this done before. No one taught her to bend this into a hook. No one had shown her how it could happen, but she did it all on her own. So keep in mind that she's never seen this done. Right. Yeah, all right. So that's the part where the researchers freak out.
So, by the way, I highly recommend getting on the web and looking up crow intelligence and all of the different studies that there are about crows and how smart they are with tool use and problem solving. They can they do social learning. It's just really incredible. It's such a fabulous group of birds. I know that sometimes because they are so smart, people tend to think that they're nuisance birds, but really you should look at a crow as just a flying brain. It's such a smart animal. So tool use indicates high advanced cognitive thought, and parrots are known for their communication with their owners. They can memorize words, and they can actually they're not just repeating things. Some of them can actually form thoughts and sentences and actually do direct communication, not just repeating. And we also know that all these different kinds of animals are wonderful problem solvers. This isn't just crows and ravens and jays. I mean, if you thought about a vulture, would you think that it is a bright animal? But they are also known for tool use as well. So here's an African vulture that has a problem in that it cannot open this gigantic egg. So it's got to figure this out. So what does it do? Its beak is not strong enough. Tearing beak, not a breaking beak. So use the tool. That's smart. So, not enough time to really delve into this too much, and not enough that it deserves. But birds are smart. Birds are really, really smart, and not just crows and jays. Birds all around. They're incredibly adapted. They're really ecologically smart, but they also have advanced intelligence. So this idea that birds are dumb is not fair. Dodos were not dumb. They were evolutionarily just not informed. They had no idea what they were looking at, but they were really well adapted to their environment. So again, like lay an egg, I would argue that if you are calling someone a bird brain, you're giving them the thumbs up on their intelligence. So let me be the first to extend to all you bird brains out there a welcome to the wonderful world of using Birdbrain in the correct way. Just a couple more before we wrap up. This is a little bit of a, not a direct phrase, but you probably heard the word cardinal rule. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I like also to understand where bird names come from. So if you look up cardinal rule, for example, this is the fundamental rule. It is one that upon which others matters hinge. And this really comes from, cardinal comes from the Latin for hinge, and it means principal or pivotal. So it means the pivotal rule. And Roman Catholics call their principal clergy cardinals. And coincidentally, these cardinals wore red robes. So the color became known as cardinal red. When settlers came to America and they saw this bright red bird, they named the bird after cardinals. So it comes from that Latin word. And there's a really fascinating book by Michael Edmonds called Taking Flight. It's about the interaction between people and birds throughout the course of history in the Midwest. Great book. So that's basically where the word cardinal had come from. And then there's also a lot of great books that look at the etymology of bird names, especially Latin names, common names and Latin names. One of my favorites is called Words for Birds. But if you're interested in Michael Edmonds' book, this is a great book. I just finished reading it online on my digital copy on my available through my library. It's a lot of fun. And then finally, I want to talk about eat like a bird. And this means to eat sparingly or pick at your food. If you know somebody who eats like a bird, you know, you think that they peck at their food and they don't eat much. And this probably comes from people raising chickens, and they look at how, the little pecking behavior. It doesn't look like they're eating much. They don't wolf it down. They don't really have the capability of doing that. So it seems like birds aren't eating that much. So while birds eating seeds are doing the same thing, like kind of pecking at the seed, you watch a bird at your feeder, it doesn't look like they're, really chowing down at the local buffet. But let's take a peek at this. Birds have the highest resting metabolism of all vertebrates. They are burning fuel quickly. I mean, flight especially is extremely costly. So let's take, for example, and they're eating all day long. It's not like you and I who are, maybe we graze here and there, but we have meals throughout the day, 2 to 3 meals throughout the day, or maybe 4 or 5. But birds are eating all the time, opportunistically and as well as purposefully. So digestive systems in birds have to be extremely efficient. They've got to be lightweight. Let's take this ruby-throated hummingbird, for example. It's at any point in its day, it's only a few hours from starving. And the majority of its food is a really sugar-rich nectar, and that's available in a bunch of different flowers and other places. It eats insects and spiders and other things, but it really principally relies on nectar. And it's interesting because it can, unlike you and I, we can process glucose, but we need to take other sugars and convert it to glucose, like fructose, for example. But a hummingbird can process fructose immediately. It doesn't have to convert it, so it's much more efficient. Sugars pass through a hummingbird in less than an hour, and they eat about half their body weight in sugar per day. So they are chowing down on sugar. Cornell Lab of Ornithology used to have this cool little Eat Like a Bird website, and so you could go in and you could choose one of these two birds. These are both frugivores; they both eat fruit. So if you pick a cedar waxwing, which is a bird that we know here in the Midwest, and you put in your weight in pounds, you could find out how much in berries you would have to eat in order to be like a cedar waxwing. So 140, I'm sure somebody out there is 140 pounds. You might know somebody who's 140 pounds, not 140 pounds. So if you said you were 140 pounds, and a cedar waxwing consumes about 228 dogwood berries per day, which is quite a lot. So comparing you at 140 pounds versus a cedar waxwing, you'd have to eat 46,577 blueberries per day, or 215 pints of blueberries per day, to match how much a cedar waxwing is eating. And that looks like this. So you're not allowed to buy this many blueberries, especially right now. You can't find this many blueberries. You could not physically do this. Your body does not metabolize fast enough for you to eat this many blueberries, but it does for a cedar waxwing and other frugivores and other birds. They are incredible. They're also incredibly efficient. So this ruby-throated hummingbird we talked about, which has this incredibly high resting metabolism, has to conserve energy, so it goes into torpor every night. So when it goes to bed, it's able to go into like a mini hibernation every night and shut everything down so that it's conserving energy. And then when it wakes up, it's got to go eat right away, and that's what it's doing. Their respiration can drop really low. Their basic heartbeat will slow down. Their breath will slow down, and they will reduce the energy as much as 60%. So really fascinating adaptation that's related to having to eat a lot of food. So let's go back to eating like a bird. Birds are eating machines. They are eating all the time, especially during migration, where they can, there's some really interesting analyses about how many Big Macs you'd have to eat in order to keep up with what birds are eating. And it's not healthy. It's not even close. So they're eating machines. And so eating like a bird means you're actually eating almost your body weight every day, which I don't recommend. So if this eat like a bird thing is probably one of the most off of any of the bird phrases that are out there. So if you eat like a bird, please slow down. You've got some things to fix. So that was a brief review of some of the bird phrases out there. There's a lot. There's ducks in a row. There's flip the bird. There's feather your nest. There are so many of these that are out there, and they're a lot of fun to look for on the World Wide Web and other places. I know I will continue to do the same. If you have questions about this kind of stuff, or any more questions about birds in general, or about the work that Madison Audubon is doing, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I hope this talk was not for the birds, or is it for the birds? Anyway, thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate everybody's participation, and I wish you all the best in these crazy times. Be well, be safe, and enjoy spring migration.